This is the vast Mülhdorf forest in Bavaria, southern Germany. And it's within these dark woods that lurks the testament to a fool's dream. To give some context as to why Vineyard 1 and this site here was important from a German point of view, we've got to go back a couple of years and you've got to look to 1943. And this was when, in 1943, the United States Army Air Force, specifically the 8th Air Force, both bomber and fighter, really started to ramp up operations over mainland Europe. Now, it was a slow start in 1942, and for the first half of 1943, kind of remained that way. But then with Operation Double Strike, the Regensburg and Schweinfurt missions, they started to ramp up. But it was becoming blatantly apparent that the old theory, Dewey's theory of the bomber will always get through, was a load of BS. It wasn't the case. They needed escort fighters. And to begin with, 8th Fighter Command, when they had Thunderbolts and Lightnings as the only escort fighters, they would stick relatively closely to the main bomber force. And this was a mistake that the Luftwaffe made in 1940 during the Battle of Britain. Fighters are hunters, they are killers, and they needed to be out front. But the Americans hadn't quite learnt this lesson yet. Fast forwarding to February 1944 with Big Week, this was really now the Americans ramping up before D-Day. They knew that to successfully complete the invasion of mainland Europe, the Luftwaffe had to be crippled. Probably wasn't going to be destroyed, they knew that, but it needed to be feeling the heat. So Big Week saw them launch a series of missions, and with the new P-51B and C Mustang variants that had now come online and were in sufficient number in the UK, and with their extended fuel tanks and their extended range, they were able to go out ahead of the bombers, and the American doctrine changed for 8th Fighter Command. They were now out hunting and trying to knock down the Luftwaffe en masse in dogfights, and basically using the bombers, the B-24s and the B-17s, as bait to lure them up. And then after they'd finished shooting them down in the sky, they would then drop down to the deck and strafe the airfields. But what did this mean for the Germans? Well, along with the attacks on German industry and German aircraft industry specifically, as well as aircraft getting knocked out of the sky, it meant the Luftwaffe was hurting, and the Germans needed another way to ensure productivity and ensure output of machines at least. Pilots was a different story, but ensure the output of the machines at least, so they could continue to feed to feed the war effort and meet the threat of the United States Army Air Force's daylight raids. And that is why Albert Speer and all the other Germans involved in the armaments industry and works, production within the Reich, turned to German mountains and German forests, where they knew they could build vast complexes and remain relatively undetected. and that behind me is it. That is Vineyard 1, or Vineyard 1. Work started here in May 1944 and it never saw completion. The plan was, though, for a massive factory complex to be constructed here to build ME262 engines in relative safety before they were then shipped off to WWII at Landsberg on the western side of Munich by road and rail before being fitted to operational aircraft and then flown to the front line. Right, and this is the archway itself. Hopefully from me standing here you can get an idea of just how vast this structure truly is. I mean, it's quite something to be stood underneath it. The archway itself, as it runs over my head, that was about 3 meters worth, 3 meters deep in terms of concrete thickness from end to end. And so the foundations and the structure went down 19 meters. You know, this was going to be a real bomb-proof, blast-proof building, much in the same way that the submarine pens in France were. You know, a real testimony to the designers of Organisation Todt, who were the guys who were responsible for the designs here. Now, this was archway number 7 of what would have been 12. So stretching out to the east, which is that way, there would have been 6 others, and then had they have built them, behind me there would have been the remaining 5. So it would have been a huge complex. I mean, you can get an idea of the scale of each archway from end to end. I think in terms of size, they're about 30, maybe 30 to 50 meters in length. So the site would have been huge. And underneath this archway would have been a secondary archway, providing more blast protection, and you know, protection from Allied bombing. But then the real work would have happened right underground. It was planned to be a real safe and secure location for them to construct ME262 engines here. Building work started in May 1944, and okay, so sort of 11 months, because by the time the Americans got here in April 1945, the site was never completed, and then they took over and then carried out their sort of liberation of this whole area. Now, what's really interesting, though, is by that stage in the war, this part of Germany, I mean, this part of Germany was well within range of the United States Army Air Force and the Royal Air Force, but this site was never bombed. Now, Mülhdorf town nearby, the marshalling yard there, the railway yard, was hit and that was totally destroyed. But this location was only ever photographed by the 7th Photographic Reconnaissance Group, using converted Lightnings and Mustangs for it. So the Americans and the Allies, they knew of this site. They knew of its location. They knew that, that the site was being constructed. But it was never bombed, and I find that intriguing. And I can only assume that by the time that any real sort of structure started taking shape here, that they were more intrigued, especially because they knew kind of probably into the early spring of, you know, the sort of February, March time of 1945, that, yeah, there was still hard fighting to go, but the war was very much going in their favour. The Germans were on their last knees, and it was only a matter of time before they got to this part of Germany. So I can only assume that the intent from the Allies was, well, there's not a lot of point in bombing it because it's only being built, and therefore just to keep an eye on it, to fly reconnaissance flights over it, to photograph it. But yeah, I don't think they ever had any intention of bombing this area. So one interesting part about this site was in 1947, the 14th US Armoured Division and its engineers were tasked with destroying the complex here at Vineyard 1. And of the 6 archways that stood out to the east, they managed that by packing them full of explosives and then demolishing them and having them fall in onto the forest floor and onto their foundations. But number 7 here, this one, the last standing one, you can see there, they managed to blow a huge chunk out of it, but it still stands in silent testimony to the workers and to what took place here to this day. And I think that's kind of cool. You know, it's good to have constant reminders of what took place during that period in man's history, and I think it's really important that, really fortuitous that this particular archway managed to survive the blast. Now, what is also quite interesting, when I was speaking with Gunther about the site and, you know, just about the kind of the general history of the place, he said after the war, the Americans were here, the US Army was here, and they wanted to get rid of a load of their explosives, so like, you know, grenades, bazooka rounds, rifle rounds, all sorts of you know, ordnance they wanted to dispose of. So they dug pits and tried to get rid of it. Now, for anybody that's done any work in explosive ordnance disposal and clearance work, if you're going to get rid of stockpiles of ammunition, you really need to do it in a certain way. You need to do it so that when you demolish the gear, when you go to dem it and to blow it up, it remains in the pit that you've dug it in, so that everything can explode, and therefore, you know, everything's rendered safe because it no longer poses any threat. It just doesn't exist. But what the Americans did here, I don't think they dug the pits deep enough. So when they fired off the charges, they had what's known as kick out, and a load of munitions were scattered throughout the forest and throughout this area, the area behind me, this whole section of the forest. Now, at the time, they were just like, yeah, whatever, didn't do anything with it and didn't care, and they left the area. But then, as life got back to normal, a lot of German kids would come and play in the forest here, and naturally, as a kid, I mean, playing on something like this would just be like a really fun thing to do. You know, I'm in my 40s, and being here is a really fun thing. So, you know, totally understand why kids would want to use it as a playground. But clearly, this area would have been really, really dangerous because of all of that ordnance that hadn't been disposed of properly and was just left scattered throughout the forest. But fortunately, all the years that kids played here, they never suffered any incidents with it. And I just think that's a really nice, kind of a nice story, something nice to hear about a site that was clearly built on the backs of modern day slavery. So kind of a nice little story that fits within the wider piece and the wider history of this place. Now, when I first came here in 2021, was actually over at that bunker. You can see just the roof of it behind me. And there was a local German guy there fully decked out in high vis, so I don't know, he was obviously part of the team here, but he didn't really speak any English, and my German's not great, so but he basically meant like don't come in because of the EOD work they were doing. But now speaking with Gunther, it turns out this site has been completely cleared, so it's 100% safe to be here, which is great to hear, because then there are plans, I think, over the next couple of years to put in more about the history of this place, make it a bit more accessible. Nothing too crazy. It's not like Normandy or Bastogne here. Clearly they don't celebrate what took place, but they are going to make it more accessible so that visitors can find it easier to get here and understand more about the site. So, you know, some good work will be happening at this site here, which is really great to hear. So, because the structure here, despite it clearly suffering some structural damage over the past 80 years, and the concrete being 3 meters thick, let's go up and take a look and see what the view's like from the top of it. So it's actually pretty easy to climb straight up it, although you can probably see from the way I'm bent over, it's a really steep angle. And also you can see the amount of concrete rebar that is steel rebar that's sticking up through the ceiling. So I just got to watch where I put my feet. Now, interestingly, bits of it look like the roof are finished, but that's not the case. Whilst this was being built, it got to about 3 meters thick here, but the eventual plan was for it to be 5 meters thick, so really resistant to anything the Allies could drop on it. And that, folks, is the view from the top, and I think you'll agree it's pretty impressive. Cannot imagine what it would have looked like to have seen the other 6 stretching sort of all that way down there behind me to the east, and then to have another further 5 sat in this direction here, heading out to the west. It must have just been an incredible sight to see during World War II. And I mean, I've seen the photos of it during the construction, but when you're here, you finally get a real sense of the scale, the sheer scale of it. And looking out over the edge, and I'm not going to go too close because I quite enjoy life, but you can see like that slab there, part of that roof section, just how big and impressive it is. And you can see where the forest floor kind of like dips down and dips away. The trees are at a much lower level than everything else. But kind of to quote Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, you know, life finds a way. It's incredible how the forest reclaims its territory from man's stupidity, and you know, is able to bring life back to it. But as we walk on the surface here, you know, again, there's more chilling reminders of the human cost, the human price paid for such a folly, such a ridiculous idea. You can see here there's more boot marks from the workforce, and they're all over the site in different places. There's another, and you can even kind of make out here the little dimples from what probably been the hobnails on the underside of the boot from the worker who trod there and made that lasting imprint on the site. At these spots here, although it's only the foundations that exist now, I believe these were the entrance points to the different archways, the different sections of what would have been the factory. And you can see them behind me there. They stretch sort of all the way down, back behind me there through this woodland clearing. And they would have been put in place for the remaining 5 archways that would have then carried on all that way down there. And we can sort of see just here. Obviously it's kind of hard to tell from when the Americans demolished it in 1947, but with this being here, and this bit of the structure, it certainly does look like this would have formed part of that entranceway. Although it's clearly in the state that it's in now, it's quite hard to tell. Behind me, you can see there's that massive, what looks like a massive rocky outcrop just above my head. That, along with the rest of the stone here, all behind me, this formed part of the 6 archways that were actually successfully demolished by the US Army in 1947. And standing here, you know, probably 3 meters below kind of ground level, maybe not quite that much, but you can really get a good idea of just the scale and the depth of this place, and just how deep underground, that 19-meter depth from ground level down, that the factory would have been. And you can see in that big sort of outcrop kind of structure there, you can see all the concrete rebar sticking out through it still. And this stretched actually a good fair few 100 meters into the woods down toward the east. And one thing that's really interesting about this site here at WWII is you're walking through the forest and it feels like you're walking through just a load of boulders, you know, like a rock field. But it's incredible to think that this was part of the structure, because the way it's ended up, it does look so like a natural rock field, but all the concrete rebar that's you know, everywhere in the ground here, it's still so prevalent. It's that constant reminder that this was actually a structure built under really horrific conditions. So walking through the site here, if you look behind me, you can see the surviving bunker, the surviving archway, all the way back there. I'm probably, I don't know, maybe 100, 150 meters further to the east from that now. And just walking through this area, you've got to be really careful because the concrete rebar still sticking up out of the ground is just literally everywhere. And I'm really conscious that one wrong move, especially while I'm filming, could result in something pretty gory. Although, could do really well for the channel. But on a serious note, you can still see that the ruins of this place are just literally everywhere. And I'm wondering, doesn't really seem to be any clear way down, but I'm going to try and get down and go and check out that structure over there. So this is probably one of the dumber things I've tried to do for the channel, but I figure it's worth it to go and explore and check it out. So actually, probably a really dumb thing. Kids, don't do this at home. If you just happen to have the ruins of a massive German Nazi bunker in your back garden, I think we'll take a slightly easier way down to it. Ah, here we go. There is an opening. There we go. Check that out. There's more of so that's where I was just standing there on that part of the archway, and it's incredible when you look at this, just the sheer scale of it. I mean, this really is one of those structures that, you know, we talk about like Nazi megastructures. I know there was that series on TV which I think actually they did come here at one point. I'll be honest, I didn't really rate it too much. But exploring this site here is just, it's just incredible. And to think as well, I'm like merely stood, well, I'm starting to lose my bearings a little bit in terms of how high up, or sorry, how low down I am from what we would consider ground level, because as I said earlier, this factory was going to be 19 stories deep. So it was going to sit really far down in the ground, obviously to protect it from any Allied air attack. But now you just can't get an idea of kind of where the forest floor level should be and where the actual sort of structure would have sat. Because of the destruction from the demolition work that went on here. But what you can see is that structure here, and this is absolutely vast. I mean, these are just huge, huge concrete structures. It's incredible to see them. I'm probably now from the archway about 300 meters away, I imagine. And it's still going on. We're still going through the woods, and the rebar is still very much underfoot, and you can still see the sheer amount of concrete structure. It's just incredible. But all the time as well, you know, you're sort of constantly reminded that this wasn't built by a construction company per se. I mean, it was. There obviously was a construction company in overall charge of the operation here, but you know, the workforce was that of slave labour. 90% of the force here was actually from Hungary. They were Hungarian Jews, but they were also from Greece, from France, some Germans, you know, a real mix of labour force here. And of the sort of 8,500 that were employed here throughout the war, from the sort of 11 months from construction finish to the end of the war, you know, you've got to remember that nearly 4,000 of those died through exhaustion and being overworked and SS brutality. And that's, you know, whilst I stand here and yeah, it's an impressive structure, it's really impressive, just because the sheer scale of it. You know, we do have to remember the human cost that happened here as well, and that's really harrowing. So I think I've managed to reach what would have been the first archway that was built, as the concrete rebar is pretty much dried up, and you can see, hopefully the perspective comes out all right on the camera, but you can see down there, that's the actual forest floor. I'm probably, I don't know, a good 40, 50 feet up from it. It's a huge structure, and then there's this wall, this outer portion, but there's still more debris from when the site was demolished down there in the on the forest floor. But you can see it runs pretty straight, and then there's that other huge section looming up there in the woods. But we'll make a start back to the main archway. But I just cannot get over the sheer scale, the sheer size of this place, and just how much concrete and how much structure collapsed when they blew it up. That it's still sat in the woods, and we're still actually really high up from the woods. We're not low at all. I think we must have walked up a slope coming this way, but yeah, it's incredible to see it. Really, really impressive. But again, it's always with that, whoa. It's really impressive, but it's always with that thought very much at the forefront of my mind that a lot of people died here in its construction. And I was lucky, actually enough, when I first got here, to meet one of the local tour guides, Gunther, his name was, lovely guy, born in 1944. So he's an older gent, and he really, you know, he's known this site for a long time, knew a lot about it. To be fair, he should be the one talking to the camera, not me, because he knows a lot more about it than I do. But he told me some stuff, and he said that the ages of the workforce here, there was, I think it was about 500 kids, so between the ages of like 13 and 18. And I know, see, in this day and age, kids tend to be, they think they're adults quicker than what they actually are. But back then, kids were forced to grow up and be kind of adults a lot sooner. But still, you just think, incredible, you know, 13 years old, working here day after day. They had to walk 2 kilometers from the two camps, the 2 woodland camps, the accommodation buildings that were built here in the woods, and then come here and slave away for a brutal regime that would just work them to death. And it's very harrowing to think that when you look at the sheer scale of what it was they achieved here. So it's a real, I don't know what the right term is, perhaps juxtaposition, but it's a really thought-provoking place in that sense. So for the keen-eyed amongst you, you might notice that this gully's, for the most part, pretty straight. And as we come down here, there's still remnants of the site here, and a single shoe. No idea if that's wartime or not. If it is, that's quite harrowing. But there's different concrete blocks here. And then as we come up and over this rise, we get to the other side. And there we can see the remains of the old train line and the tunnel that was used to service the site. And it was this train line here that would bring the gravel in to the site so that they could actually build up the structure on the inside of the arches. Because don't forget, it was 19 meters deep, so it was really deep underground, and obviously they needed a way to bring in the gravel and the materials to build up the site from there. So they'd bring them in this underground train, and those squares that you can see sat on the surface, they were points that could be opened up, gravel could be poured in, and the workforce underneath in the tunnel would then take that gravel and then use it for the construction. But interestingly, Gunther, the tour guide who I met earlier, he brought me to this spot, and he told me a story about an Austrian man who's 95 years young, and he's going to be back here next week for a small commemoration. Because he was here as forced labour, and he was working in these tunnels, and under that square you've got like a gate, and if you don't, apparently, obviously as the gravel came in and the building materials came in, if you didn't close that quick enough, it would keep coming. And 3 times he was caught underneath this flow of material, 3 or 4 times, and I think the 4th one it nearly killed him, but his workmates managed to drag him out, and he's going to be back here for the service and the commemorations. And it was really interesting because Gunther said that he didn't speak with any hate in his heart as to what took place here. He just remembered it. It was just part of his life. It's just part of who he was, and I find that quite incredible and very humbling. So you can see the entrance to the tunnel. It's not really an entrance anymore, but Gunther did say that you can get in it. So let's go take a look and see what we can find down there. And first of all, though, I do need to take my backpack off, because although I'm kind of skinny, I ain't getting in there that easily. And he's right, it's a pretty tight fit. And there we go. And apparently this goes on for about 15-20 meters toward the track now, but I don't have a strong enough torch with me, and also I'm not brave enough to go in there on my own, so that's as good, I think, as you're going to get today. And now I've just got to try and squeeze my way back out. Fortunately, I haven't drunk enough German beer or eaten enough German bratwurst to get stuck there. So yeah, quite an incredible part of the site, and one that probably gets overlooked quite a bit, obviously, because you've got the main archway, which is kind of the focal point for anybody coming here, because it's so overbearing and so impressive. But yeah, interesting to know about this railway line that ran in and actually serviced the site from the underground, and to hear the story from Gunther of this old Austrian boy that used to work here, and that was, on many times nearly killed here. So let's go and take a little bit more of a look around some of the other parts of the site. So behind me, that big sort of bunker type complex, honestly, I'm not sure what part of the factory it formed here, whether it was sort of served as a generator housing or whatever, but it must have been valuable, whatever they planned to put in there, because you look at the thickness of the roof. It was clearly designed to be protected from any attack from above. And you know, the thickness of the walls here as well, it was clearly designed to shield and protect whatever it was that was planned to go in there. Now it's just basically on its last legs, and probably not a great idea walking underneath it, to be honest, but I figured it's stood for nearly 80 years, so another day isn't going to do much. But yeah, you can see there just how thick the walls were in this place. But it was in this area actually that I came back in, you know, a couple of years ago. I was saying that one of the local German authorities was working here and kind of told me to leave. He was very polite about it, I'll hasten to add. He was very nice about it, but clearly concerned for my safety. And then, yeah, we eventually realised what it was, but it's nice to be able to sort of take a proper look around it now. And you can see throughout this site as well, there's other sort of remnants just kind of left by the wayside from that period of time. No trip to this site here would be complete without paying my respects to the human story that took place here. And I know I've mentioned it at the main construction site, the main bunker site, but it's here, and this is my final stop for the day, at this location, that was used as the mass grave for the nearly 4,000 of the just over 8,000 slave labourers that were brought here to this location to help construct the main factory site. So we'll go in and take a look. I'm probably not going to say anything. I'll just kind of let the pictures and some of the text speak for itself. Nothing that I could say would possibly do it justice. I just think it's important to cover it so that these people and what they went through and their sacrifices aren't forgotten. So I hope you've all enjoyed this episode about WWII or Vineyard 1, the ME262 engine factory in southern Bavaria that kind of never really was. Stay tuned, I've got loads more stuff coming up. I'm off to Normandy real soon, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. If you haven't already as well, don't forget, hit that notification bell so that you know when new episodes are out. And don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. All right, I'll see you all in the next one.